Mr. Tonko, and there's so many aspects of this that deserve to be discussed. One of the things that's kind of sad is that the Republicans, in talking about their plan to privatize Medicare, say, oh, this is just like the plan that members of Congress have. Well, first of all, members of Congress have the same plan as every other federal employee, so it's not necessarily anything that's special that we have. But the only thing that is somewhat similar about this is that you have some options in the private sector. We buy insurance from private vendors, and we have a certain allowance. And under the Ryan plan, the Republican budget, they would, the seniors, all those under 55 now, when they become seniors, they would have a certain amount that they could spend, not just could spend, had to spend in the private sector, because they won't be allowed to buy into any Medicare program or a public option. The difference is, as you pointed out on your graphic there, that members of Congress and federal employees pay about 28% of the premium. What, under the Republican budget, seniors are going to pay 68% of their premium. This is shifting the burden, the cost, and putting it on seniors who are on fixed incomes, who don't have the ability to pay. And what's going to happen to them? This is so unlike the federal insurance program. It is pretty, I mean, it's frightening in its dishonesty. But I want to talk about one thing quickly and then yield to Mr. Garamendi again, because we talked about taxes and tax rates. And in the Budget Committee last week, I offered an amendment to the Ryan budget that would have restored the Clinton-era tax cut, highest tax rate of 39.6%, on Americans making $1 million a year or more. Now, that is a very small percentage of Americans. Very small percentage, less than 1% of the Americans make over $1 million a year. And I said, let's just have them pay what they paid under the Clinton era. Not one Republican vote for that. And their argument was, and I know they believe this because they keep saying it and have always said it, that if you raise the tax rate on the highest income Americans, that they're going to lose incentive, that they're not going to work as hard, that they're not going to make investments because you're eliminating their incentive. Well, for those with a long memory, the highest marginal tax rate in this country's history back in the 60s was 91%. I'm sorry, under the Eisenhower administration was 91%. When my father built his company in the 70s, 60s and 70s, the highest marginal tax rate was 70%. When Ronald Reagan took office, it was 50%. Now it's down to 35%, and they want to cut it even further. Now, they have this belief, again, that if you raise rates, you're going to destroy incentives. I built a company. Both my brothers have built very successful companies. My father built a very successful company. Not one of us has ever said, oh my gosh, because I can only keep 40 cents or 60 cents of that next dollar I make rather than 64 cents or 65 cents, I'm just not going to make that dollar. Just doesn't make any sense for me to work that harder. Business people don't think that way. That is not human nature. And I have one brother who's very successful. He's in the barbecue restaurant business. You all have heard me tell this story 100 times. I'm going to tell it again. I asked him, what about this marginal tax rate thing? And he said, you know, if people can't afford barbecue, it doesn't matter what my tax rate is. And that's really where we are as a country. That's where we've come as a country, because we have let the middle class decline, because their buying power has declined, not just in relative terms, in absolute terms over the last decade, while the wealthiest Americans, these people making $1 million, $1 billion and more, have done extremely well. Right now, 1% of the American people make as much as the bottom 90% combined. We have the greatest disparity in income and wealth in this country that we have had in almost 100 years. And yet ask millionaires and billionaires to pay a little bit more, not a lot more. We're not saying go to 70%. We're saying go to 39% from 35%, not one Republican vote. We've seen in the past what's happened with tax rates. We've been talking a lot about history tonight. Under the Clinton administration, during the Clinton years, top tax rate of 39.6%, 20.8 million jobs created. After the Bush tax cuts, reducing that top rate to 35%, 653,000 jobs lost. That is not evidence for cutting the marginal tax rate on the highest income Americans even further. We've seen again. Right now, the Bush tax cuts, well, this is a job loss thing, the economy floundered after the Bush tax cuts went into effect. So, again, all we're saying is, if we're going to ask people to sacrifice as we try to get our fiscal house in order, we need to ask everybody. And particularly, we need to ask the people who have done the best and who have earned the most and who have the most wealth. And again, the person who has talked more about what it takes to create jobs in this economy is my colleague from California, and I yield.